All right, listeners, I think you know that we are part of the Radiotopia network, which is basically a network built on the idea that you should support the most creative, independent audio makers around. No one, and I mean no one, embodies the Radiotopia ethos more than Benjamin Walker and his show Theory of Everything. Benjamin, who I've known for a long time, has been making beautiful, personal, sprawling audio documentaries for decades that help us understand the very strange world we live in. And now he has a new series called Not All Propaganda is Art. The new series goes back to the 1950s when Western security agencies like the CIA paid artists, writers, and intellectuals to fight the cultural Cold War.
The CIA funds were free. I mean, no one was told what to say.
Gloria Steinem, activist who sees the CIA as a sort of enlightened pal or rich uncle, there is another viewpoint.
Look, if you're listening to this show, I know you like secret histories. I know you like a mix of culture and politics and shadowy figures. So what are you waiting for? Not All Propaganda is Art from Benjamin Walker. You can find it now wherever you listen or at theoryofeverythingpodcast.com. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, 1919, the tail end of a race riot that engulfed Washington, D.C. The black community in Washington was under assault in many ways. Howard University had basically barricaded itself. Other neighborhoods were raising funds to buy weapons to defend their homes and businesses. There were skirmishes throughout the city between various groups of citizens, the police, and eventually federal troops. In the end, this kind of moment that we're marking here, dozens of people had died, and it took about 2,000 federal troops to bring relative peace to Washington, D.C. Some of the details that we will get into are astounding, as is maybe the location. This was taking place in the nation's capital, and a lot of the details, though, feel like something we'd maybe associate from stories and violence of this era more in the Deep South. But here to discuss that and what to make of these riots in 1919 Washington, D.C. are, as always, Nicole Hemmer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
So, Kellie, I gather you write about this in your forthcoming book.
I do.
So
the whole section about this riot. It is wild, for sure.
So this is the sound of Kellie moving over into the driver's seat. But no, tell me if you agree with my sort of premise there that, like, this feels like a story, unfortunately, that, you know, a lot of the details are fairly common to this era and racialized violence of this era. Particularly, you know, there's an accusation of sexual assault or sexual violence at the heart of this between a white woman and a black man. You know, and I read that and it's like, oh, this feels like something from small town South. What do we make of the fact that it's happening in the nation's capital?
I mean, it's interesting because we absolutely expect this in the South, not in a place like Washington, D.C. At the time, D.C. is about 1/4 black. It has about 100,000 black people living within the city. And it's crazy because you have black veterans who are returning from war and they have certain expectations about what life is going to be like for them after they've served their country. And what they come back to is not a whole lot of patriotism and love for them, but a lot of resentment. And there's a lot of racial animus in the air. There is a lot of competition over jobs. And it terrifies white people that black people for the first time sort of feel empowered or emboldened in the way that they're approaching their citizenship. And it just spills out into the streets in violent ways.
Yeah. And just on that one note, I mean, obviously the timing here, it does feel like you read accounts of this, that a lot of this is coming in the wake of the 4th of July celebrations. And, you know, I guess I hadn't really ever thought about it, but, like, you know, those 4th of July celebrations in the wake of World War I probably meant something very different. And to your point, you know, you have this black community in Washington, D.C. They're coming off of this notion of patriotism and thinking about rights and this country and their citizenship. And so all those dynamics.
And being a soldier, fighting
Yep.
and dying for your country,
Yep.
It's a big deal.
So all that is in the air as this moment then breaks out.
Well, and also being in Europe, right? And being in Europe, carrying the American flag, but also experiencing a less virulent racism there, a more open society there. And then coming back to the United States, coming to these parades, celebrating the United States and this patriotism while feeling those restrictions anew, because you had at least a little tiny window into what it might look like if things were different in the United States. So you can imagine how tense everything was. And also it's 1919. So you're coming at the end of the war. You're having all of the economic upheaval after the war. There's just been a massive pandemic that has disrupted life in the United States. So there's so much change in the air that creates both a sense of possibility, but also a sense for some people that they really need to tighten the screws to return the world to the way that it was.
So let's go to the details themselves. I hinted at kind of what sparks this, but Kellie, what do we need to know?
Oh, man. There is a mad dash to get as many guns, as many arms on both sides of the racial fence as possible. So Black people are going as far north as Baltimore to meet with arms dealers to protect their communities. The word on the street is that there will be riots, that white people are going to destroy Black communities, destroy their homes, their schools, their churches. And so the Black community says, we will not allow this to happen. We are aware of what has happened in other places. And this is really one of the first incidences. And when you see Black people taking a stance, a major stance of collective self-defense, and also fighting back in ways in which the casualties, the white casualties in this riot are higher than the Black casualties, which is really one of the first times that you see something like this taking place. But everyone is arming themselves, and it's pretty scary. You don't want to be out on the streets. You know, Carter G. Woodson, the founder of Black History Month, is a professor at the time at Howard, and he's walking not far from the campus, and he witnesses a white mob literally attack and execute a Black man right there on the sidewalk. And, you know, he hides and manages to get out of Dodge. But could you imagine how scary that is?
Yeah.
Seeing someone killed right in front of you.
So, Kellie, what is the underlying event that sparks all of this, as best we can tell?
So we're not exactly clear. There are a number of different versions of what might have happened. But what I believe is that a white woman was walking down the street while it was raining, and on a crowded sidewalk, a Black man bumps her, knocks her umbrella out of her hand. From there, the stories vary. It is a question of whether he tried to steal her umbrella, whether he tried to assault her, and then, of course, did he try to rape her? That always becomes like sort of the final boom that people will latch onto. And it really explodes. The rumors of Black soldiers, especially, seeking out white women or trying to assault white women. That idea, that myth has always been prevalent. And it really becomes fuel to the fire.
Well, and exacerbating all of that are these daily newspapers. There are 4 in Washington, D.C. at the time, and they're all competing to sell the most copies about what this incident that has supposedly happened. And they're all printing increasingly lurid and sensationalistic and frankly falsified stories about what happened. They have headlines like "Negroes attack girl, white men vainly pursue," and "Negro thugs." And they're all about selling papers, but what they're doing is that they're stirring up the anger, the tensions, the outrage that ultimately lead to the violence that we would see in the days that followed.
So coming back to kind of what I hinted at in the intro, you know, Kellie, I'm just, these are the details that seem to me to strike me as something that's like a lot of these stories that you hear from the South, you know, and often these stories end in lynchings or, you know, arrests or extrajudicial justice. But the way that the newspaper ferments these stories and these rumors, the way that rumors spread, the way that a small incident gets blown up, and then obviously the sexual and racial dynamic, a white woman, Black man. Is it just that this happens to be taken in a city where there's a quarter of the population, hundreds of thousands of people are Black, or is it changed in some way by that fact, or the fact that D.C. is obviously the nation's capital, but also, you know, at least contested territory, if not, you know, in terms of whether it's part of the South or not?
Yeah, I mean, D.C. has always been sort of an interesting place because it's at the confluence of, you know, a slaveholding South, a free North. Maryland is a slave state. Virginia is a slave state. DC has this interesting relationship in which slavery is like banned, but you can still trade. It's complicated. But also, it's one of the few cities in which you have like a prosperous, growing Black community. You have Howard University there. You have Black doctors and lawyers and professionals there. You have people like Carter G. Woodson. And so not everybody who's there is poor or experiencing hardship. And I think that's also different. This isn't the sharecropping South. This is an empowered, emboldened group of African Americans. And I think that is why, or at least one of the reasons why, self-defense is so much a part of this narrative. They are defending the things that they have fought really hard for, which was a great quality of life.
Yeah. Which is where, in part, it brings to mind for me, Tulsa, right? Where we talked about a city in which the Black community had started to build its own resources and build its own part of the city, and have some agency of its own. And you read some of the details here, and it is so much about people defending their neighborhoods and their centers of business, and then also these marauding groups of people going into other neighborhoods and so forth. And some of the details are just incredible. So you have there's a neighborhood in D.C. that was apparently known as Murder Bay, which is down by Pennsylvania Avenue.
Horrible
What a
name.
name. Yeah, I know. And it's like, and that's where there were like taverns and brothels and pool halls. But it's like, it's a Friday night. You're going to go out with your friends. It's like, what neighborhood do you want to hang out in? Let's go to Murder Bay.
Only good things happen there.
But anyway.
Or Bloodfield. That's another neighborhood, Bloodfield.
Yeah, well, that was one of the African-American neighborhoods was called Bloodfield, exactly. But, you have these like groups of hundreds of people, a lot of them ex-soldiers standing outside of taverns, arming themselves in these neighborhoods, trying to protect these businesses, and also, get into some trouble and scrap it up.
Well, and those taverns actually, interestingly, play a strange role in this as well, because D.C. is kind of ahead of the rest of the nation in banning alcohol. They have prohibition before you have federal prohibition. And what that means is that taverns become kind of a gray market, black market area where you suddenly have white soldiers and black soldiers and white DCers and black DCers congregating in the same place. So as you're getting people getting angrier and angrier, and many of them drunker and drunker, they're all in that same compact, Murder Bay or Bloodfield, where the conflicts can break out.
Yeah.
Can I tell a crazy story that every time I read it, I'm still kind of like, I can't believe this happened, which is some of the white community is attacking the black community, and they're forming these mobs, and they're going pretty much from block to block, throwing rocks in people's homes, shooting inside people's homes. It's terrifying. And there is one girl by the name of Carrie Johnson. She's an African-American girl. She's about 17 or 18 years old, and she is standing on the roof of her house in DC with her father's shotgun and basically like pecking people off that are coming down the block that are terrorizing the community. And so to know that like this black teenager is like defending her community, it just my mind is blown. And that she gets arrested and eventually acquitted of all charges because
she gets acquitted.
It was self-defense. They saw it as self-defense.
That's amazing.
And so they, dropped all of the charges. But to me, it's just what takes place, I think, is common for what's happening throughout the South, but it's also unprecedented in the way that black people are fighting back.
Yeah. And some of the other details there. Well, first off, the role of the press, the Washington Post apparently kind of got out there and called for soldiers, I think white soldiers, to come into action and defend the city. And then, basically calling for armed intervention. And then the black communities, we'd hinted at this, but, some of the numbers are pretty astounding. They raised, what is the equivalent to now, $250,000 to buy guns and ammunition in order to defend in order to defend themselves, and they went out in cars and were shooting up white targets, and then there were these incidents where there were 2,000 black veterans forming a line of defense down Florida Avenue and U Street. If people know Washington D.C., you can sort of picture that, facing south and then having this standoff with the police. I suppose we should talk about the response here, both at the city level and at the federal level. some of the reports are, part of what exacerbated this is that Washington, D.C., I guess there's a long lineage here, but Washington, D.C.'s local leadership was not very strong here, right? And so it allowed this to kind of get really out of hand over the course of a few days.
Right. And it's also where the president lives. And Woodrow Wilson was a pretty stark segregationist. He had resegregated the federal government when he took office in 1913. But as it becomes clear that the local law enforcement is not effectively responding to Black resistance in D.C., he's the one who orders these thousands of troops to come in. There are lots of military bases surrounding D.C., unsurprisingly, and they come into the city and begin to put down the Black defense of these neighborhoods.
But it's really a rainstorm. I mean, that on the fourth day of rioting, there's a major thunderstorm that takes place. That is really what stops the bulk of the fighting. The troops come in that day as well, but the rain is what causes a lot of people to abandon their cause and to skirmish, and then they're left to deal with all of what's left, which is a lot of dead people on the Black side and on the white side.
There is something meteorological about these kinds of uprisings, right? We often talk about the long, hot summer when we talk about uprisings in the 1960s. And it does matter. It matters if it's hot. It matters if it's raining. It has a real effect on events.
Sure does. You don't see a lot of these riots take place in the winter. I can tell you that.
Nope. Sure don't.
Yeah. Did we mention Wilson's diarrhea?
We did not.
Past that?
No, we did
Okay.
not.
That's apparently why he was so ornery and kind of maybe even delayed, but then sort of brought the hammer down, was that he was a little sick and suffering from severe diarrhea, in addition to being a huge racist.
Yeah, I know.
Some combination of those two. But apparently, yes, did have severe diarrhea in this moment. Okay.
So he couldn't help out because he was full of shit.
Yes, there you go. Or quickly not full of shit. All right. A little context here as we wrap up. But, this is one incident in what was actually sort of coined at the time, I believe, by the NAACP, but then now is sort of referred to as the Red Summer of 1919. And so, Kellie, can you give a little of that context? I mean, there were incidents like this in dozens and dozens of places around this country in that one summer.
Countless. I mean, if you think about the summer of 1919 in Charleston, in Chicago, Cleveland, Elaine, Arkansas, which is probably the most horrifying because 237 Black sharecroppers get murdered over 2 days. There are 78 lynchings in this year. 11 Black men are burned alive at the stake. So this is a violent year. It's a violent several years. It's also the moment in which the Klan really gets revived in 1915, and they take on a whole new level throughout the 19-teens and 1920s. And it's something that I think should never be forgotten, that kind of moment in which the country could sort of not find its footing in terms of race relations and violence. And it just seemed like every other city was having this domino effect of massacres or riots.
Yeah. And also, as we discussed, I think in many ways, a moment in which, emboldened by World War I and veterans coming home, but Black communities actually fighting back in a way too, is a huge dynamic in here as well. All right, well, yeah, there's a ton of other just sort of stunning stories, and we will certainly visit some of them in future episodes. But that's the end of this one. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
Radiotopia.